All right, so today we're going deep, really deep into, well, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. We're unpacking the online persona of HBomberguy. And get this, our main source, a Kiwi Farms thread.
Oh boy, Kiwi Farms. That's a whole other beast.
Yeah, it really is.
They're known for their, let's just say, dedicated user base. And they can dig up some stuff, like seriously dig up information about people online.
Some might even call it controversial, some of the stuff they find.
Yeah, you could say that.
So if you're not familiar, HBomberguy is a pretty popular YouTuber known for, well, video game reviews are kind of his thing.
Right.
But he's also very vocal about his political views, which lean pretty left. And he often gets into it, debates and criticizes those with different viewpoints. Sometimes those labeled, anti-SJW.
And that, my friend, is exactly the kind of stuff that gets Kiwi Farms all riled up. It's like looking at this one tiny corner of the internet through a microscope.
And things get magnified for sure.
Yeah, they do.
But before we even touch that Kiwi Farms thread, let's rewind a little. HBomberguy. He's been around the online block a few times. He was active on the Something Awful forum years ago, like way back.
Oh, really?
Yep. Even hung out with some, let's say, colorful characters back then, like Haberman.
Okay.
And ever heard of a group called Meadowcur?
I can't say that I have.
Yeah, they were known for their, well, provocative tactics, to put it mildly.
Interesting.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. This was all happening around the same time that a certain Mr. Meadowcur was making a name for himself. Remember him?
Oh, how could I forget?
So you have HBomberguy on these forums crossing paths with, figures like Meadowcur. It really makes you think, does our online past ever really go away?
That's the question, isn't it? Like, how much of that shapes how people see us later on? It's like those old yearbooks, Except it's the internet, so it never really disappears.
Yeah. And in this case, that yearbook is a Kiwi Farms thread. And let me tell you, it's a doozy. They really dig into some, shall we say, interesting chapters of HBomberguy's online history.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like they see these past associations.
Yeah.
And it's a big old red flag for them.
Right. And it goes beyond just who he knew back then, and that they start accusing him of hypocrisy, even saying he's into censorship and questioning, the organizations he supports.
It's a lot. And we got to remember, this is just one little corner of the internet.
Oh, yeah. Kiwi Farms definitely has their own, perspective. Let's say that.
Putting it lightly.
Yeah.
But, okay, specifics. Sorry. One thing that stuck out was this whole creep label they throw around. They even say he's an apologist for sexual harassment.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it seems to go back to his Something Awful days.
Oh.
But even they kind of admit, there's not much proof.
Which brings up a really important point about online. We've seen what happens when someone gets canceled based on, rumors, basically, without even getting to defend themselves. Right. It's scary how quickly things can get out of control.
It is. And this whole HBomberguy situation, as messy as it is, it makes you think about accountability online, you know? What's our responsibility when we see potentially damaging information? Do we share it? Do we question it?
It's a good point. We all need to take a step back sometimes and really think critically, especially with these anonymous online forums.
For sure.
Because they really don't hold back. This thread lists a whole laundry list of complaints against HBomberguy. It's wild.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to build a case, But the evidence is often flimsy at best.
Yeah, they criticize him for being friends with Sarah Nyberg and Dan Olson.
Right, who are both pretty much considered persona non grata on Kiwi Farms.
Exactly. And then there's that whole thing with him supporting punching Nazis.
Which has become such a loaded statement these days.
Totally. People interpret it in such different ways.
It shows how easily things get twisted online. How one phrase can have completely different meanings depending on who's saying it and who's hearing it.
It's all about context, right? And speaking of loaded terms, we got to talk about the SJews thing.
Yes, that one.
So for anyone who's not familiar, it's basically combining SJW, social justice warrior,
right,
with Jews. And it's supposed to be satirical, I guess, criticizing those who take social justice too far.
But it definitely rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Totally. For many, it's just not funny. It trivializes the Holocaust and just perpetuates harmful stereotypes.
It's a good example of how what one person finds funny, another finds incredibly offensive. Humor is subjective. And when you're dealing with sensitive topics like that, it's a minefield.
And the thread goes on. They criticize him for supporting trigger warnings and safe spaces.
Which they see as being too sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Like coddling people.
Yeah, the world needs to toughen up.
Exactly. And of course, there are the accusations of censorship,
Right, with the Twitter block bot.
which they see as him silencing opposing views.
And the Google Chrome extension he made that filters content.
Again, controlling what people see online.
It's like they're trying to paint him as this evil censor. But then, on the other hand, you have his very public support for causes like Mermaids UK.
Right, the charity for transgender youth.
Which is another thing they criticize him for, but it's like he's trying to do something good.
And that's where this whole in-group, out-group mentality really comes into play. You have people who see HBomberguy as a hero, and others who see him as the villain. It all depends on which online bubble you're in.
It's like two completely different realities.
It is, and that's the danger of these echo chambers.
Yeah.
We surround ourselves with information that confirms our existing beliefs, and we forget that there are other perspectives out there.
It's easy to get caught up in it, for sure, but as we're seeing, there's always more to the story than meets the eye. And you know what really gets me about this whole thing? This is where it gets good.
Okay.
So there's this whole Donkey Kong incident.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
It's like this perfect example of how polarizing HBomberguy can be. So picture this, right? He does this whole live stream, and he's playing Donkey Kong 64, but like nonstop. We're talking like 40 hours straight.
Wow.
And he's raising money for Mermaids UK.
Oh, right, the charity.
Yeah, for transgender youth. And get this, he raises a ton of money, like over $350,000. But of course, Kiwi Farms, they just can't help themselves.
Okay.
They're in there making fun of the whole thing, like who plays Donkey Kong for 40 hours?
Right.
But then it gets a little darker because they start accusing him of supporting the brainwashing of children.
Yeah, and that's a whole other level.
It's like they see this whole thing with transgender youth and it just sends them over the edge.
Well, it's definitely a sensitive topic, and HBomberguy being so publicly supportive of it probably really rubs some people the wrong way.
It's like they can't separate the charity from the issue itself, you know?
Right. And it just goes to show how complex and sensitive these conversations about gender identity are, especially when you're talking about young people. It's easy to get caught up in the online outrage, but we have to remember that there are real lives at stake.
Absolutely. And Mermaids UK, they do some really important work supporting these kids and their families.
Exactly. So regardless of how you feel about HBomberguy or the organization itself, the fact that he raised all that money, it's hard to deny that it had a positive impact on a lot of people's lives.
No doubt. So yeah, this whole deep dive into HBomberguy through the lens of Kiwi Farms, it's been a wild ride. We've gone from like old forum posts to accusations of hypocrisy to marathon gaming sessions for charity. It really makes you think about how we form opinions about people online.
Totally. Because we're only ever getting a tiny glimpse into their lives. And with someone like HBomberguy, who's so vocal about his beliefs, it's easy to make assumptions.
And to judge. But it all comes back to this idea of online personas, right?
Yeah.
Like the version of ourselves we present to the world versus who we really are.
It's like we're all playing a character to some extent online.
And with social media, it's getting harder and harder to separate the two.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, how much of what we see online is genuine? How much is just for show? Does it even matter if the end result is positive? It's a question without an easy answer.
For sure.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, we leave you with this. How do you reconcile these conflicting pieces of information about someone you see online? What shapes your opinion of them? And how do you navigate this whole world of online personas where nothing is quite as it seems? It's something to think about as you scroll through your feeds and remember it's just a glimpse, it's not the whole story.